we do have one more segment, which is our Q&A, our marriage Q&A.
Yeah, the question of this week is, what do you do if you are the spouse that wants to continue to grow personally and in your marriage, but your spouse is settled and doesn't want to do any of that?
Well, I think going back to our conversation, the meat of this podcast, that's what God feels like every single day.
Yeah,
which is
true.
like, we as a stubborn people, he's showing us his relentless love, and yet we continue to do what we want to do. And at the end of the day, that's what sets a covenant apart from a contract. Meaning a contract, you have one party does not follow through with the terms of the agreement, the contract is null and void, or you're able to legally, require something of them. But with a covenant, it's like, even if that person doesn't fulfill their end of the bargain, I'm still committed to fulfilling mine. And allowing that change to be an illustrated sermon for your spouse. In the end, the Bible says in 1 Corinthians 7:14 that the unbelieving husband is sanctified through his wife, and the unbelieving wife is sanctified through her believing husbands. And it talks about in that passage about the good works. It's through these good works of displaying your life like an illustrated sermon of, no matter what you choose to do, I'm going to choose to pursue God. My wife never condemns me for not reading my Bible at night when she's reading her Bible. She allows me to have my own relationship with God. And she might look and say, well, I'm progressing here, but they're not progressing. Well, have you had the conversation about spiritual growth with your spouse? Or are you continually trying to project upon them what you've determined to do in your relationship? And that's just one example of a lot of different areas of your life. You have to give your spouse freedom to make those decisions themselves and accept them where they are, and do what you can do to show up every single day with your best self.
And maybe they are growing and you're not seeing it because you're so stuck with your strategy and what works for you. And kind of like what we talked about, that family calendar at the beginning of this episode, it's a strategy that may be good for a woman because most women are very administrative, but a man may work differently. And we've always heard men say, well, I may not have time to read my Bible in the morning, but when I am going to work in my truck, I'm praying and I'm crying out. And it's like, are you going to push your spouse to read these books and fill out these papers? Or do you want them to genuinely have a personal relationship with God in their own way? And you have to give them that liberty to do so. And it's okay to say, hey, do you want to go to this marriage, retreat? Or, keep nudging them to specific things if you feel like that your marriage is definitely needing a tweak or two. I think there's nothing wrong with that, to keep saying, hey, I think we do need help in this area. Would you be open to reading this book, or maybe going through this course together, or maybe going through a devotional together? So I think there's nothing wrong with nudging, but ultimately, you may have a certain way that you're growing and they may be having a certain way of growing. You have to give that person liberty to be themselves and grow at their own pace, so to speak.
It's about, again, not eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and judging your spouse's growth. Yes, we need to have those conversations. We need to edge each other on. We need to challenge one another, but as making sure that it's not my way or the highway. If they're not growing the way that I'm growing, then they must not be growing. So I hope that answers your question just a little bit, but that was the Q&A of the week.